All right, let's dive in. Today, we're going to try and make sense of one of the most complicated and, well, divisive conflicts in modern history. We're talking about the Vietnam War.
And that question right there, that's really the heart of it all. How did a war fought literally half a world away, 8,000 miles from home, end up tearing America apart? Because this story, it's not just one war, it's two. One fought in the jungles of Southeast Asia, and another one fought right on the streets of America.
So why Vietnam? Of all places, why there? Well, to get to the bottom of that, you have to zoom out and look at the bigger picture, the massive global chess match between the United States and the Soviet Union, the Cold War. You see, the whole reason the U.S. got involved came down to this one big idea, this one policy called containment. And it's pretty much what it sounds like. The goal was to build a wall, basically, around communism and stop it from spreading anywhere else in the world.
And right there, you have this huge clash. It's like two teams playing completely different sports on the same field. For North Vietnam, this was a war about one thing: unifying their country under a single communist government. But for the United States, it was about containing that global ideology, stopping that first domino from falling in Southeast Asia. So they were fighting for totally different reasons.
Okay, so as America poured more and more soldiers and resources into the battlefield, something else started growing back home: picket lines. The escalation abroad directly led to opposition at home. It all really kicked into high gear after 1964 with the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Now that event is, well, it's pretty controversial, but it gave Congress the green light for a huge escalation. And boom, by 1965, the first official U.S. combat troops were landing and the bombing campaigns were starting. The surge was on.
And when I say surge, I mean it. Just think about this. By 1967, there were over 500,000 American troops in Vietnam. 500,000. That is an absolutely massive military commitment.
But here's the crazy part. For every soldier being sent overseas, it felt like another voice of protest was rising up at home. In the exact same year, 1967, while we had 500,000 troops there, you had 400,000 people marching against the war in New York City alone. The two fronts, the war abroad and the war at home, were growing side by side.
And a huge part of that protest movement centered on the military draft. It all got summed up in this one simple, defiant chant that you heard everywhere: "Hell no, we won't go." It basically became the anthem for a whole generation.
It wasn't just one thing, The fire of protest had a lot of fuel. The draft was a big one, for sure. But then you had the rising number of American casualties being reported every night. You had these shocking images of weapons like napalm. And then, as if that wasn't enough, the war expanded into Cambodia. It just kept getting worse.
So all this tension, all this division, it was all building to a boiling point. And that point was 1968. This was it, the turning point, the year the war really truly came home and completely shattered how Americans saw the conflict.
And it all kicked off with something called the Tet Offensive. Now here's the thing. On paper, from a purely military perspective, this huge attack by North Vietnam was a failure. They didn't achieve their objectives. But psychologically, for the American public, it was a complete game changer, an absolute bombshell. Why was it such a bombshell? Because it proved that what people were being told by the government just wasn't true. Imagine, you're hearing officials talk about all the progress being made, about the light at the end of the tunnel. Then you turn on your TV and you see the U.S. Embassy, under attack. Suddenly, it was crystal clear this war was far from over. This created a massive credibility gap, and trust in the government just fell off a cliff.
And back home, the country was just on edge. The whole social fabric felt like it was ripping apart. All that anger and division just boiled over, erupting into these violent clashes in the streets, between protesters and police. The most famous example, of course, was at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, with the whole world watching on TV.
And then, the unthinkable happened. A couple of years later, this tension reached its absolute tragic peak at Kent State University. National Guardsmen actually opened fire on student protesters. 4 students were killed. This was it. The war at home had turned deadly. The event sparked this massive nationwide student strike, shutting down over 900 college campuses. The country was in shock.
After all of that, the political pressure just became overwhelming. The U.S. had to start pulling out, but the end of the fighting for America didn't mean the end of the story. The conflict left these deep, deep scars that would last for a generation, both in Vietnam and in the United States.
So how did they get out?
The strategy was called Vietnamization. The idea was to hand the fighting over to the South Vietnamese forces. A formal deal, the Paris Peace Accords, was signed in 1973, and all the U.S. troops came home. But it didn't last. Just 2 years later, without that American support, Saigon fell, and the North Vietnamese unified the country under communist rule, the very thing the U.S. had fought to prevent.
And the final cost, it's just staggering to think about. For Vietnam, we're talking about millions of deaths, millions of refugees, and a land that was physically scarred. For the U.S., the cost was different, but also incredibly deep. Over 58,000 deaths, yes, but also a country torn in two, and a complete loss of faith in its leaders, which actually led to new laws like the War Powers Act to try and stop something like this from happening again.
Yeah, let's just sit with these numbers for a second. In Vietnam, it's estimated that over 2 million people died. 2 million. That includes soldiers and, of course, countless civilians. It's a number it's hard to even wrap your head around.
And for America, more than 58,000 service members never came home. That number is etched into the American consciousness. It represents a generation's worth of loss and left this permanent, painful scar on the whole country. So in the end, it's clear the Vietnam War was never just a military conflict fought in some distant jungle. It was a cultural civil war. And the battlefields were America's living rooms, its dinner tables, and its college campuses. And the long shadow of that war, well, its echoes are still shaping our politics and our debates today.